Welcome, everyone. If you are joining us here today, you are interested in improving your quant score. Quant score from going from wherever you are to a quantitative score of 90. It's a high bar to achieve. Perfect score in quant. That's something challenging. So we're going to talk about how we get there. And as always, as we move through this, be sure to like and subscribe this. Liking it helps other people find it. Subscribing it, make sure that you get notified for future videos from this same presentation style. In fact, this is the quant portion of a three-part series. Later on, two of my colleagues will cover verbal and data insights. So you will want to be here for the whole three-part series, and you will want to know when that is happening. So remember, make sure you subscribe to this. But moving forward today, just looking at how we go from a quant score of anything to a quant score of 90, we're going to focus on three main types of skills that we need to have in order to do this. And I have some problems to share which highlight variations on these skills. And so as we move through this, and as I'm showing problems, I will give people a chance to look at these problems, a chance to try them. I would be very interested to hear what your thoughts are on these problems, how you feel about them. But let's go ahead and dive in. Just some basics here. You have three sections: quant, verbal, data insights. Each one is 45 minutes, but there is a slight variation in the number of questions per section. Note that your scores here are 60 to 90. Those scores do come with percentile rankings. Please ignore percentile rankings for your subscores. These subscore percentiles aren't normalized to fit any type of a bell curve distribution. And so your percentiles for the subscores, not a worthwhile data point. And in fact, your percentiles for the subscores are not what create the main score, that 205 to 805 number. It is just these subscores. So your question is always, in quant, how far away am I from 90? In verbal, how far away from 90? Data insights, same question. First goal for anyone, you want to get scores at 80 for each of the three sections. And then after that, it is a race to see which section you can get to 85 fastest. And you want to basically have a strong section leading the way. And then once your strong section hits a benchmark score, 80, then 85, you stop working on your strong section and you go back to the other sections and try to lift them. Because as you hit these benchmarks, 75, 80, 85 scores, the next level of improvement is harder than the previous. And so since each section counts equally towards your overall score, you're always wanting to make sure that you lift the lower things first before you try to push any individual score to the level of like 85 plus or 90. Again, about the sections here, you can put them in any order. You can do verbal first or verbal last. The verbal last is actually my preference. I find that I am very, very comfortable with verbal, but that's just my personal preference. Or you can put verbal in the middle. Note here that the general recommendation is to not do quant and data insights back to back. If you're doing quant and data insights together, put your break between them, or use verbal as a buffer between quant and data insights and put your break wherever you wish. The quantitative section and the data insights sections are the sections which have the most just physical writing, lots of notes. And so that's just has its own fatigue factor involved. And so you generally do not want to do those back to back. And again, if you put verbal in the sandwich there, you can take the break whenever you want. Now, again, just looking for some basic information on where you are with your understanding of the way the score is calculated or how the scoring works. You have two options presented here for how this computer adaptive test would go. Person one reached very, very high levels of difficulty, but they trailed down at the end. Person two never reached the highs of person one, but they also never trailed off at the end. Is the test section adaptive? No. It is question adaptive, Ajay. So the idea is that inside the quant section, the computer is calculating an Ajay quantitative performance curve to find out where you exist in quantitative. But when you start the verbal section, the computer resets, and your verbal adaptations will be purely independent of your quantitative adaptations. So it's just about adaptive question to question inside a section. My question to you, to all of you, who gets the higher score? Person 1 or person 2? Please let me know your thoughts in the chat. Bako is saying person 2. Ashka, Ajay, Mukit. Any other thoughts? Who gets the higher score, person 2 or person 1? Suraj is saying 2, and we're all getting yes. Now our votes are coming in, so we're familiar with this. Good. Person 2 will definitely get the higher score. The reason for this is the way the test is designed. The test is designed to test your ability to make decisions inside of a challenging problem set, whatever that problem set may be. And so what the scoring algorithm does, it looks at a string of wrong answers, especially at the end. And please, for the love of all that is good and beautiful in your life, make sure you do not run out of time and leave questions blank. That eviscerates your score. Leaving questions blank at the end of a section just really just makes your score nosedive, plummet. It's awful. But the idea is that you are meant to look at some questions and say, that is not worth the cost. That question will be too expensive in terms of time. Even if I could do it, I should not. You're meant to make that decision. And the computer, the scoring algorithm, looks at a string of questions wrong at the end or running out of time and leaving questions blank at the end as you did not make those decisions, and it will punish you by giving you a lower score. If you score high on quant, will you start with a harder question on verbal? No, they're independent. The quant section is built separately and independently from verbal and data insights. Verbal is built separately and independently from quant and data insights. So what the test is doing is the test is trying to find your level where you get the questions correct about 60% of the time. Where your difficulty range is and where your difficulty rating is where you hit 60% accuracy, that will be your score. Again, assuming that you perform consistently through the entire section. And so you see here, person 1, they get a higher score, not because they answer more questions correct. If you notice that the blue dots are correct, the red dots are incorrect, they basically miss the same number of questions, and yet they get vastly different scores. What I often tell people is that even if you miss half of the questions in a section, if all of the questions you miss are at a higher than 85 score level, your overall score is going to be 85. That may not be a literal calculation, but it is a very, very accurate description of how the scoring works. It's not about how many you miss. It's about which questions you miss. You want to make sure that when you miss questions, and bluntly speaking, we should probably all plan on missing questions. It's very, very, very rare to go through a section and get all the questions correct. You want to make sure that the only ones you miss are the hardest ones. Again, people keep throwing, I would love it if everyone just keeps throwing questions in the chat. I'll respond to questions as I see them. It does not have to be about the slide in question. You can throw anything at me. I'm here to make sure that you get the most information and the most help from this session possible. And one reminder, make sure to hit that subscribe. Make sure that you get notifications on when the other parts of this series, the quant, today's quant, the verbal, and the data insights will perform. All right. Before we dive into specifics, does anyone have any other questions about the scoring of the test or the way the computer builds the test? If you don't have more questions, let me know in the chat, say no questions, and we'll get to the specifics of what we need to improve quantitative scores. How do you decide which questions are the ones we need to skip? Arun, deciding which questions are the ones we need to skip, if we're talking about the quantitative section, for me, it is about how much time will that question require. My general mental state is the problem can be difficult in one of two ways. The problem can be difficult in terms of understanding the language of the problem and understanding how to build the problem, but the numbers involved and the numbers in the answer choices suggest that the calculations should actually be fairly easy. Or the problem can be very, very easy to understand, but the numbers suggest that the calculations will be very intense and very time consuming. If I see a problem that is both very, very long and very difficult to understand, and the numbers and answer choices suggest that all the mathematics and calculations I need to do will also be very challenging and very time consuming, I'm out. I guess, Mark, move on. Ajay, in general, would the question number 1 be of medium difficulty? That is a general statement, yes. There is, however, no guarantee for that. The computer is essentially doing a little bit of a randomization where it can start anywhere in the difficulty, but it has the probability is weighted more likely to give you a question of medium difficulty at the beginning. But I have absolutely seen practice tests, and actually, I remember on my actual test, the first question that I saw on the quantitative on my actual test was something I had to get out. I had to burn it. I saw it and I was like, no, this is not working. And I just had to trust to the algorithm that burning that question was not going to hurt me. And it did not. I definitely got the score I needed, which was, I think on my first one, it was 725 or 735. I forget exactly which one, somewhere around there. Do I expect percentiles to come down? Over time, Vaco, yes. I expect percentiles to come down. I suspect that that would happen over the course of like maybe a decade. I suspect that the genesis, the push to build this new version of the GMAT was because the classic GMAT scores were starting to get pushed. People were starting to learn the test itself more and more and more over a decade, over 20 years at least. And scores had started to climb and average scores are getting higher and higher and higher. And this test is not meant to be some sort of score arms race where you're always pushing to get a close to perfect score. That's not what this test is meant to do. And so the people at GMAT who make the test, I suspect that they saw this happening and put in a plan probably 7 or 8 years ago to say, all right, we need to re-envision this test, re-envision the scoring scale to bring this back down, because right now we're getting score inflation to too high of a degree. So we'll expect will percentiles come down eventually? I suspect so, but it will take a long time. And again, please don't quote me or presume that I absolutely know what was in the decision-making process behind the new version of the exam. I'm merely telling you what I suspect based on what I know about how the exam changed, how the scoring percentiles changed, and also what I know about they built the classic GMAT, then they built the executive assessment. I teach executive assessment also, and then they built the new version of the GMAT. And I can see this sort of trend of moving towards tests which push against the idea of you need to get that close to perfect score to feel competitive. And they don't want the test to be that. It's not supposed to be about how close you are to a perfect score. That said, everybody wants that perfect score. Everybody wants close to a perfect score. Let's talk about how we get there in the quantitative section. A lot of text on the screen. Just going to take a moment, take a breath. Everybody take a few minutes, or maybe just 1 minute, read through this. This is my personal trio of skills that I rely on to get the quant scores that I need to get that really high, well into the 700 scoring. There are a few things that do require strict algebra. Those are actually more rare than most people think. Most problems on the quant section do not require traditional algebra. There are other ways to solve those problems. That said, if you see quadratics, if you see absolute values, if you see exponents, you are more likely to be doing a more traditional algebraic manipulation in that problem. The bulk of the problems are, for me, around organization skills. I have a list of things, but the idea is that realistically, pretty much any story-based problem. You talk about a company that has one rate level for a service last year, and then they changed their charging methodology, and now they have different rates that they charge for a certain product this year. Anything like that, any story-based problems, it's about organization first, maybe never algebra. And if you do algebra, algebra is last. And then I have those sort of questions where it's you look and go, I don't know what is going on in this question. I've never seen a question like this exactly before in my life. But I look at some of it and go, okay, even if I don't know how to build a traditional approach, I can say, let's throw some numbers at this and let's just see what happens. So I call it algebra, organization, and then scramble. And my goal for today is to show you some problems inside each of these trio of skill sets, and then talk about what is going to be that last lift from something in the high 80s to a 90. Does anyone have anything that they want to ask before we look at some problems? Say no questions if you don't have any questions, or let me know if you have something you want to ask before we actually look at some specific questions. Thank you, Ajay. All right. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Sophia. Some tips to manage time because some questions take forever to get solved. Tips to manage time. Ashka, my best tip to manage time is to make sure that you have a list of questions you do not attempt. And to make sure that when you see a question that you will not attempt, that you recognize it quickly and move on. Ultimately, what I believe breeds the most success on this test is changing the entire landscape of your average time per question. If you go back and we say 45 minutes with approximately 20 questions per section, you're looking at 2 to 2 minutes, 15 seconds per question if you spend time on every question. That's really, really tough. What you do instead is make sure that in each section, you have question types that you just look at and say no. And in 20 seconds, you get out, you make a guess, you move on. And now if you do that a few times, your average time per question gets closer to 3 minutes per question. And then, as Utkarsh is asking, will an incorrect easy question impact more than a correct hard? Yes, it will. Missing lower rated questions is more damaging than the benefit you get to correct hard questions. And so we want to make sure that those hardest, worst, most complicated questions, those most expensive questions, we look at them and say, I'm not doing that because I'm going to make sure that I have time for the more manageable questions, and I'm going to make sure that I get those correct. All right. I'll give everybody a few moments here. Give this problem a try. Thank you very much, everyone who's giving me an answer choice in the chat. Oh, goodness. I always wish that I could get people in the microphone in these, because then I see someone changing their answer, especially if they change it from the wrong answer to the right one. I really want to know what happened. I'm not going to call the person by name, but yeah, somebody saw something. Somebody realized something partway through this. And I'll tell you that everyone who's given an answer so far, you actually answered more quickly than you would need to on the test. So be aware that the more confident you feel in this, this is one of those areas where you want to sit there and say, all right, let's just make sure that I get it right. All right, so we have two absolute value relationships here. So we should expect possibly some more algebra. In fact, I'm looking right here and thinking, I don't know how to do that without algebra. I need to check if you recognize it. I need to recognize a few things here. The two cannot be the same numbers. And a product of the unique solutions for X and Y. So I need to make the solve, and then there's a final step of getting the product of that solution as well. But let's start with the easier one. Absolute value of Y plus 1 equals 3. There is algebra that we could do here. It is, however, I hope, more reliable for a simpler absolute value to look at it and say, I'm just going to benchmark this and say, what difficulty would I place this question in? I would place this question in a very high difficulty range. There are actually some pretty, I tried, this is one that I actually tried to engineer, and I tried to engineer a few very sneaky things in here. We'll see what happens. Navia, I'll come back to your question in just a moment. You could look at this and say, if I know that absolute values are almost certainly about positive versus negative results, let's think of a positive and a negative. That would create a positive 3 inside the absolute value and a negative 3 inside the absolute value. And if Y equals 2, 2 plus 1 is 3. That would do it. Or if Y equals negative 4 plus 1 is negative 3, and the absolute value of negative 3 is 3. Then I go to this ferocious looking thing over here and think, all right, I will need algebra. Should not be too surprised that I need algebra if I'm seeing quadratics, exponents, and sometimes absolute values. The idea behind algebra for me in absolute values is to think about what happens if x plus 3 is negative versus what happens if x plus 3 is non-negative. Most people phrase it positive versus negative. Technically, it's negative versus just non-negative. If x plus 3 is already negative, then to remove that absolute value, I need to change the sign the same way that an absolute value would have. I replace the absolute value symbol with something that would have the same effect. And so I distribute this minus sign. Negative x minus 3 equals 4x minus 3. I will collect my common terms together. So I'll have 5x over here, add the x to the right, add 3 to both sides, and I'll get 0 here. And then that tells me that x has to equal 0. Now, what is wrong with this picture? This is the first and possibly nastiest sneakiness in this problem. Does anyone notice what is wrong with this picture? And by the way, I am seeing several comments and questions in the chat that I'm going to come back and respond to. The entire basis of this calculation was that if x plus 3 was already negative. 0 plus 3 is not negative. And in fact, if you plug in 0 for x back in the original, absolute value of 0 plus 3, 4 times 0 minus 3. So you'd have 3 equals negative 3. What? That doesn't work. That is actually not even an option. I try my non-negative here. If x plus 3 is non-negative, the absolute value would never do anything anyway. So I can just drop it. So I have 4x minus 3. Add 3 to both sides. Subtract an x from both sides. And now we go. Great. 2 times 2 times negative 4, negative 16, yes? What's the next sneakiness here? If that crack of my knuckles came through the mic, I apologize. That was an accident. I'm told that x cannot equal y. So y here, 2 is never an option for y. My only options here are 2 and negative 4. The product of those unique solutions is negative 8. So I will tell you at the outset, the number of times that I have seen absolute values on this test where the correct math actually leads you to what turned out to be an impossible result. X cannot actually equal 0. I can count that on one hand. That is a very, very rare trick to see on this test. So this would be considered, I would suspect, a very, very, very high difficulty rating here. The point here is that when we see certain algebraic expressions, we want to have just immediate algebraic chops ready to go. And we need that time to finish the algebra and then consider the reasonableness of our result. All right, some questions that came in or comments. Navia asks, how many questions are the max we can or are advised to miss in a section? Again, that question doesn't really have an answer, because if you're only missing the highest ranked questions, then you're still going to get a very high score. I will tell you that in my experience, you can miss 5 to 6 in quantitative and still get a very high score. You can miss around the same number in data insights and still get a very high score. It's more rare for me to see verbal scores where you miss 5 or 6 and still get a very high score. Verbal scores, you generally want to limit your misses to around 3 to 4. Now, again, that's very, very rough because it is entirely dependent on the difficulty ratings of the questions you're missing. But Navia, that is my experience looking at my practice test results, my actual test results, and many of my tutoring and class students' practice test results. At the time of the real test, we don't really know which ones are hard, medium, or easy difficulty level. Our job is to solve every question correctly. Pooja, I understand that urge. The GMAT is a very strange test. It is the only test I know of where it is designed to reward a person for choosing to not attempt certain questions, even though you have to answer it and confirm your answer and just move on. So you just have to make a guess and move on. It is designed to reward someone who will make that decision. Do I know which ones are hard, medium, or easy? I have a pretty good instinct for it by this point in time because I've been doing this for more than 10 years. But do I know? I do not. However, what I do know is how much time a question is going to cost me. And it's less about hard, medium, or easy, and more about how expensive it is. I can actually miss a lower rated question, like a moderate level question, so long as I don't burn too much time on it, because I can make up for that with better performances elsewhere. Any other questions, comments, concerns? No, the GMAT scoring algorithm is not regional. That's not possible. That would actually completely do bad things to the validity of the test. Rahul, that is one of my favorite questions. How do I stop making silly mistakes of missing out on keywords in the question like the unique solutions? It has been a pain for me and so frustrating. That is one of the most frustrating things out there. Start by reviewing every single question, right or wrong, and then say, even if I answer this question correctly, what were they hoping I would not notice? And literally write down or circle or do a print, anything you can to say, what are they hoping I don't notice? And then when you start practicing sets, do something very artificial. Take any type of timer, whatever it may be. Most people use their phones, but whatever you have. And set, how can I get this? There we go. Set a timer that's counting down from about 1 minute to about 0 seconds. I do not normally recommend using a timer. I normally recommend using a stopwatch because the actual test does not have any external alarm that beeps and tell you, two minutes has gone by, you need to move on to the next question. 2 minutes has gone by, you need to move on to the next question. The test doesn't do that. You're given a countdown from the total time down to 0. So you need to have your own ability to estimate. All that said, for that issue, set a timer for 1 minute, maybe 30 seconds. And for that 1 minute, for that 30 seconds, your pen stays on your desk. Look, read, think. And before you do any component of the solution, when that timer goes off, take your pen and write down, here is what they hope I don't notice. Make something that forces you to do that anticipation. Can I please suggest study materials for quant based on difficulty level? I absolutely can, Josh. I mean, I'm here representing Manhattan Prep. I'm actually a co-author on the All the Quant plus Data Insights book. We have an All the Quant plus Data Insights, and we have an All the Verbal book. That will give you the core fundamentals on how to do these. And then after that, the official guide is your friend. The official guide chapters and your accompanying MBA.com online question banks all have breakdowns of questions which have easier, medium, and harder ratings. So that's where you can get those separations there. Are there patterns I can draw for all these traps, or are they too huge for me to list down? There are... let me go back here because I need just like a blank page for a second. And let me make my pen white here. This is something that I recommend is a good starting point for everyone. Write down P&0, question mark, INT, question mark, E/O, question mark, and then equals sign, question mark. P in 0, positive, negative, or 0. Do I know whether my results have to be positive, negative, or 0? Integer. Do I know whether my result is going to be an integer? Do I know whether the numbers in the problem involve integers? E/O, even or odd. Do I know whether things are even or odd? And then that equals, is it possible that some of the values in this problem are the same? That last one would have been one of the key elements for the question we were just doing. If you go back here, and if you start with P in 0, well, okay, P in 0, and the answer is I don't know. Integer, I don't know, but likely yes, because look at your answer choices and look at all the components in the problem. Even odd, I don't know, and it'd be this one right here. Is it possible that some of the results can be the same? No. The results cannot be the same. Rahul, that's not an exhaustive thing, but that's a good starting point just to sort of frame that discussion and that study method. Chris Anthony, in all caps, asks, prepping for the GMAT, and I find quant quite frustrating. I feel stuck and don't seem to make much progress. What strategy do I have? Chris, when I work with tutoring students, one of the first things I do is twofold. I look at a practice test and I ask two questions. The first question is, should we even do this problem? And the answer to that will be no, more often than you suspect. The second question I ask is, are we doing algebra? And again, the answer to that question will be no, more often than you expect. I start this discussion today with algebra because there are certain things that pop up. It will happen anywhere between, in my experience, somewhere between 4 to 8 times on the test, 4 to 8 times in the quant section, where you're presented with a problem that is just, I need the algebra and I need it fast, but it is not the majority. And so the first thing I would recommend to you, Chris, is look at all the problems and ask, can I do something that is not algebra for this? A asks, how to identify when to assume values versus solving with algebra. The answer to that of when to assume value is literally any time they are going to allow you to do it. Anytime they don't give you a value and they don't ask for a value, you start by trying numbers. On that note, actually, let's move here. We saw one which is like straight up algebra skills. So we have that. The next one, more organization based. Everyone take a few minutes. Give this one a try. Rahul, did you notice things that they are hoping you don't notice? For example, here, the second sentence. If both musicians start at the same time and work at their normal rates, they will complete the job in 45 minutes. So they are working together right there. Next sentence. However, if Perry were to work at twice Maria's rate, they. In this third sentence, Perry and Maria are still working together. Perry is just changing the rate at which he works. That's the type of thing that you want to practice noticing. Now, my next question is open to anyone in the chat, but it's really focused on the mystery individual known only as the letter A. How many instruments are in this warehouse? And I'll begin building the organization I would use for this problem while you answer in the chat. How many instruments are in this warehouse? There we have it. They don't tell you, and they never ask. So you get to pick. My preference would definitely be to pick something which is a multiple of both 45 and 20, so I would go with 180. 4 times 45 is 180. 9 times 20 is 180. And now I can craft equations for their rates. This second row, my Maria plus Perry working at twice Maria's rate, that creates a rate of 9. That means that literally Maria's rate is 3. And if Maria's rate is 3, Perry's rate has to be 1. And now if Perry's rate is 1, to do the same warehouse of 180 instruments, that's a lot of instruments, would take 180 minutes, which is 3 hours. This is a question where, for me, organization carries it. I have my rate time work columns. I have a row for each scenario. I label my rows. People never label the rows. But if you label the row, you've essentially done 90% of the work already. The organization is key for a problem like this. So there we have a problem that I think hits on 2 levels, the organizational skills, but also A's concern about how do I know when I can just assume numbers? An example of if they don't tell you and they don't ask, you can assume your own value. Now, next up, what I call the scramble skills. Let's do this one. Again, we're getting close to the end of the hour. So I'll only give you about 1 minute to begin consideration on this one. It won't be enough time to make you feel comfortable with the solution, but I want you to at least have some acquaintance with what you would want to try. Take 1 minute. Just think about what you would do. This would be an example of what I call a scramble problem. I have never before, other than this problem, and I know this problem, but like nowhere else in this problem have I talked about things that have to be product of 2 consecutive integers and 3 consecutive integers. Maybe there's some cute mathematical name for that. I don't know it. I've never studied this. And so I don't really know what to do here other than say, Chris, if you're talking about products of integers, you're talking about factors. And so maybe I can grab prime factors and everything. And I don't know what else to do. And I'm being very literal here. I would not know what else to do in this problem other than just to go to my choices and say, let's see if something works. So I'd start with the A, 153. And I'd say, well, 3 plus 5 plus 1, 9. I know that 9 will be a multiple of that. Let's find out how many times 9 goes into 153. And I'll do that, doing old school math here. 6, 3, 17 times, 9 times 17, fair enough. And so I'd say break it down 9 again, 3, 3, 17. I don't see a way to build that into consecutive integers at all. I look at 210. 210 is kinder than 153 for me. 210, I can break that down into a 21 and 10. I can break a 21 down into a 3 and a 7. I can break a 10 down into 2 and 5. And now I'm still going, okay, these prime factors are all more clustered together in magnitude. Maybe there's something here. And I see the 3 consecutive integer before I see the 2. And I actually see I've got a 5, 6, 7, because the 3 and the 2 will build me that 6. To build the 2's, well, let's see here. 7 times 3 is 21. No. 7 times 2 is 14. Ah, there we go. 7 times 2 is 14. 3 times 5 is 15. Now I have my 3 consecutive integers and my 2 consecutive integers. Number 210 works, and I would just go. I would not check the rest. These problems are engineered, not randomly thrown together. Once you know your choice works in a scramble problem like this one, don't try the others. Move on. So this is an example of what I call a scramble problem. I look at the math and I'm like, I don't know the math. I've never studied math like this, but they're telling me things that I can understand how to break down into pieces and at least try to, fiddle with this and see what I can throw at the problem and see what sticks. Let's try that for a bit. And it turns out to work out. So there we have what I call scramble. And now we've seen one example of an algebra, an organization, and a scramble skill. Now, everyone who's still here, everyone who hopefully you've liked and subscribed, again, just got to throw that out there because the more you do that, the better off you're going to be. And to get notifications for these, you'll see all of these individual parts of these seminars. The next 2 slides, maybe 3 slides, if there's one thing that you remember from today's discussion, remember what I'm going to tell you next. Everything that we've talked about will get my quant score to an 85 plus very reliably. If you can master a few core areas of algebra, be very comfortable with the ways to organize story problems, and recognize when the strange math is just disguising an opportunity to just throw some numbers at a problem and see what works. That won't get you perfect, but it will get you to an 85 plus. To get to a quant 90, you will need those obscure quant topics that most people never study. Things like probability, combinatorics, 3-level look sets. There are others. Those are 3 of the big ones, though. Those are 3 of the ones that most commonly get brought up in these types of conversations. And you're talking about these. And I want to point out, on each of these slides, there's a little subtitle slide. And I want to call out the subtitle for this slide. Is it worth it? I beg of you, do not study those obscure mathematical topics until every single section is at least an 85 score. the other points will be easier to get and more reliable, because these most obscure topics, they require a lot of study for bluntly very little reward, because they don't pop up that often. That said, today is about seeing that Quant 90, so I want to show you one. Everyone take a minute, give this one a try. Right, so that's 1 minute. Probably not enough time to solve, but at least enough time to get acquainted with the problem. And A put something in the chat that I just want to highlight here. Same strategy for quant, no probability. And I'm guessing P and C is permutations and combinations. No probability, no permutations, combinations. Burn them. Just look at them and say, no, absolutely not. But like I said, did a Quant 90, there is that obscure question that is going to be needed. And this is an example of one. I'm going to show you how I would attempt this problem. I would never feel good about it. But what I would have to do is I'd have to say, all right, one of the parents must drive and the two daughters refuse to sit next to each other. That idea of a negative constraint, something is not supposed to happen, makes me think total minus failure. Get my total options and subtract out the ones that would violate this negative constraint. So to get my total, I would just have to draw a little map here. There's the driver. I live in the US, so the driver's going to be on the left-hand side. Pretty much most other places in the world, probably not. One of the parents must drive, so I have two options for who drives. After that, for the total options, there are no other constraints. There are 4 people who could take this spot, 3 who could take this one, 2 who could take this one, 1 who could take this one, and I would multiply those out. 2 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, and I will get 8 times 6, which is 48 options. This is my total before I have removed the failures. So on the outset, C, D, and E are gone. To calculate my failures, the idea is that with a failure, my two daughters sit next to each other. And that only happens in the back row, and that only happens in one of 2 ways. Daughter on the left and middle, daughter on the middle and on the right. Still have to have one of the parents drive. So I've got 2 options for who drives. And then I have 2 daughters who could go in one of the seats, 1 daughter who could take the remaining seat. And after that, there are 2 and 1 family members left to take those remaining seats. And so each of these is 2 times 2 times 2, 8 options. 2 times 2 times 2, 8 of 16 ways to fail. 48 total ways minus 16 failures gets you to 32 ways that this could happen. Now, this is very much my personal weakest area of mathematics. If I'm on the test, am I confident in this? I am not. I believe it is the correct answer, but I would not feel that I am confident in this. And truth be told, I could not give anyone in this watching this presentation a very good explanation for why exactly this system works, and like why this idea of like starting with the restriction helps. That's what I did. I started with the restriction. In the total, your driver's seat is restricted, and the failure is your driver and your two daughters are restricted. Starting with restriction is what works. Why? What's the theory behind that? You got me. But this is the kind of thing that if you get a Quant 90, you've hit something like this. But again, because today's topic is hitting that Quant 90, because everybody wants to try to do that, I had to show you that. Otherwise, I would have been lying to you about the nature of this presentation. But please remember this slide. Please. All right. Closing up here. Keep in mind that Manhattan Prep offers opportunities to try GMAT or GRE classes for free. So you're going to try a GMAT class here. And then there is actually a very large cadre of available free options. One of the things that I would first recommend if anyone here today is something called Foundations of Math. Foundations of Math is, very, very the fundamentals, the basic things that you've got to have and have them quickly. And then finally, just note here that if you're thinking about taking a course, there is a code here that you can use that is unique for GMAT Club as the sponsors of this program. Stalin, you are very welcome, and thank you for being so active in the chat. Thank you, Ashka. I hope you all have enjoyed this. I hope you all have found it informative and helpful. It is our hour, so it is about time to close down. If anybody has a last-minute question, I'll stick around for about 5 more minutes. But other than that, I want to say thank you to all of you as well. I love the participation in the chat. That makes these fantastic. And I sincerely wish you all best of luck in your GMAT studies. Thank you, everyone, and good luck to you all. If anyone has a last-minute question, just say question please in the chat, and I'll know to wait. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and close the presentation. You're very welcome, Rahul and Stance. All right, well, thank you all again. We'll close the presentation here. Good luck to you all. Bonus question. There we go. Okay. How to approach question 2. I am... Okay, I've seen a few bonus questions, so I'll do what I can. Your question is about something in the official guide. I cannot... So I will do what I can. Those questions are copyright owned by GMAC, so I cannot do anything that would give away the details of the question. So I will try to do my best. Give me just a moment. Let me get access to that. The ebook software does take some time to load, so I'm just working on that right now. While I'm doing that, Irene, your question here. Use 1 as a representative total work done, but I've seen your method, so taking total number of work done. Yes. The key thing there is to recognize that there's always going to be a multiplication and division element in any rate idea. And so picking numbers that are easily divided by the components of the problem can just make things so much more manageable. And again, I chose a work example, but there's like 8 million different, not literally 8 million, but there are many different things that was just, if they don't tell you and they don't ask, you can pick. So we're looking at 247. Oh, Jesus, that beast. Yeah, that's an awful problem. I would never do that problem on the test. I can tell you that right now, because what I notice is there is a variable in that problem that they never give you the value of, and they never ask for the value of. In fact, multiple variables that they never give or ask values for, so you can choose. But then you look at the answer choices and you say, realistically, there's no value I can choose for these variables that's going to make the calculations in the choices a manageable calculation. So I would burn this question. That said, what you probably need to do here is try the unreasonable yet technically possible options of what if a variable is 0, and see what happens if you try if a variable is 0 and that component of the problem completely cancels out, and you probably have to solve it twice, once for each variable being 0 and the other variable being some other number. How to work on not making silly mistakes. Adarsh, do you keep an error log? And if you keep an error log, do you make sure that the error log has something where you say, I have a pen to paper technique I'm going to try to do to prevent this mistake? I mentioned earlier writing down P and 0, integer, even, odd, equals with question marks. Something you write down at the beginning of every problem to get through that. Start with that, and then make sure that your error log also has a point for you to record when you have reattempted the problem, fixing the error that you made 2 times, several days apart. What you're asking, Adarsh, is about building habits. And a habit doesn't become a habit until you practice it. So that's the idea. Repracticing those problems a few days apart from each other. The best way one can significantly, I'm guessing that's improve on organizational questions. So, Tonga, that is a question that is very, very far outside the scope of response that I can give in 1 minute, but I can tell you, try to think about 3 different ways to diagram an organization. One is rows and columns, like we did for that Maria and Perry problem about their tuning the instruments. Another is something like you're just drawing a vertical line of dashes. That's actually basically the dashes is what I did for that the family in the car problem. And then also line diagrams where you've got like a spectrum and 2 points at the end. So try to say those 3 organization styles cover a vast variety of content areas, and try to focus on saying, I want one of those 3 organization styles to try to cover almost every single story problem that I see. All right, my friends, I do need to call it here. Thank you very much for being so active. I really appreciated this time. Again, one of my colleagues will be here to talk about verbal, and another of my colleagues will be here to talk about data insights in a future session. But in the meantime, good luck to you all. Happy GMAT.